Praise the Lord, saints and friends. This is Elder Adrian Heyman. Yeah, I know it's kind of late, but I try to do a certain amount of posts per day because there's a lot to talk about. Of course, today we have the elections. In California, we voted for whether we wanted to allow for a suspension of our independent committee that draws our congressional districts in order to meet what many perceive as a threat by Republican states to unilaterally change their congressional districts so they can have more representation of a particular party. But I'm not talking about that today. No, I'm not. But that's what happened today, at least among other things. Of course, the elections for mayor in New York, governors of New Jersey and Virginia. A lot of things to talk about politically. But this is not a political session tonight. It's really one that's dealing with racism, and especially how racism twists the Bible. And I want to say that again. Racism twists the Bible. One clear example which justified centuries of slavery in this country was the reading of what happened to the sons of Noah after the flood. To give you the background of the story, Noah and his sons and their wives and his wife had just finished, or they had been able to step on dry land once the Lord dried up all of the water from off the earth. And the Lord gave Noah certain instructions to be fruitful, to multiply, to spread over the earth, and gave, of course, his symbol that he would never destroy the world by water again. Doesn't mean there won't be floods. We see floods all the time, but he won't destroy the world and threaten the existence of man by a flood again. Of course, now that symbol has been reappropriated for something else, but again, that's another story to talk about. After these promises that the Lord gave Noah, said Noah began to become a husbandman. He planted a vineyard. And they must have done pretty well because essentially he harvested, of course, grapes. And he must have crushed the grapes and must have allowed them to ferment, because that's how you make wine, an alcoholic beverage. The sugars ferment within the grape, and due to the aging process, the sugars in the grape become alcohol. It adds to what they call the buzz that you have. And also can make you drunk, which is exactly what happened to Noah. Noah got drunk. This is the same man, remember, who had found grace in the eyes of the Lord, who faithfully built an ark. And people must have, it didn't say that they did, but they must have ridiculed him. It would be very easy to ridicule something if you have never experienced rain or flooding or anything of that particular nature, because it was still how the Lord would water the earth by a mist. But it happens to the best of us, against our better judgment. But anyway, Noah tasted of his fruit, and he got drunk. so drunk that he passed out. And that as he passed out, somehow he was exposed. I mean, clothes off or in a very unflattering position to reveal his skin and possibly his gender as well. The first one that came in was Ham. Ham was one of the sons of Noah, along with Shem and Japheth. Ham saw his father, and he was not really very discreet about it. But he went and told his brothers. And the problem with what Ham did was that he did not even attempt to cover his father's nakedness. He knew that he was exposed. He knew that he was in a very compromising position, and he didn't know it really, or he couldn't stop it because he was just too drunk. You know how sometimes you lose, well, I don't know that because I've never gotten drunk, but maybe some of you that have, you understand that sometimes you lose, you lose not only your faculties, but you lose your ability to move, because it's like alcohol paralyzes you. It stops you from being able to have the strength to do what you want to do. You may want to do it, but you can't do it. So you're in a very compromising position, which is what Noah found himself in. His other sons, Shem and Japheth, after Ham had told them, they went to their father and covered him up the way it should have been. But the way they covered him up, they didn't even look at him. They looked the other way, sort of like backed their way into where their father was, and took some garments and covered him. There was an excellent attempt to try to cover their father's nakedness. Now, the reason why I say that he may have known what was going on, but was powerless to stop it, was that when he got up, when he became sober, he knew what Ham had done. He knew that Ham had looked at him and essentially it was embarrassing. And he thought that was abhorring for Ham to, it would be like, for instance, I've never seen my mother naked. Neither have I seen my father naked. I don't plan to. Now, of course, I have to take care of them. That's another story altogether. But it was just that respect for them, that I'm not going to try to film my mother or my father in compromising positions. That's not what a son does. But Ham didn't seem to care. Well, he cared enough to tell the brothers, but he could have covered him up in one way or another, but he didn't. But anyway, Noah knew what Ham had done. And then he proceeded to curse Canaan. Now, that's where the story becomes interesting, when we come up through time into our own history. What took place was that some theologians, of course, began with European and then transferred to the United States and possibly other areas. But they begin to look at that particular verse, and they conveniently leave out the fact that the one who was cursed was not Ham himself, but Canaan. And the reason why this was placed there was because This was Moses speaking of the narrative. And Moses wanted to show Israel why the Canaanites were right to be conquered when the Israelites were freed and then were guided to go to the promised land. You have to understand the context. You cannot take this as, what do you call it, by itself. You can't hold on to this. To, oh, well, you know that he cursed Ham. And so if he cursed Ham, the reason why they say Ham is because one of the descendants of Ham was Cush. And Cush, presumably, was the ancestor of most of what we know as the African people. Cush. Now, Cush. But the idea was that because Ham went and saw Noah, then Ham was cursed. And if Ham was cursed, then his descendants were also cursed, including Cush. And therefore, those who came under Cush, who came from Cush's lineage, were then cursed. Of course, those people, again, the African people, black folk, so to say, to say it more discreetly. But they make one glaring error. You cannot transfer curses from one person to another to fit your ideology. You have to read the Bible as is. And so you begin to wonder if Ham wasn't cursed for looking at his father when his father was upset with Ham, why was Canaan cursed? Could be that Ham doted upon Canaan, that Canaan possibly was Ham's favorite son, even more than Cush. And so Noah wanted to make sure that the one that was Ham's favorite would be the one that would bear the curse. And that was Canaan, not Cush. Cush, the ancestor, again, presumably because other people could have been mixed in, of the Africans. What theologians did was, with the placement of the curse on Ham himself and then all of his descendants, including Cush, that they begin to make the theological statement that since those who were born under Ham were cursed, and the African nations came from Cush, then that meant that those who are of African descent were cursed as well. And the curse was typified by the skin complexion. Even though there were many people around the Mediterranean, because it was hot around there, that had golden complexions, but not like Africans. Now, of course, this was an entire butchering of the Bible, but many people believed it and wanted to believe it because they wanted to feel superior to those who were of a different complexion. And many people adhere to this today, that they still speak of the same verse to justify mistreatment, to justify discrimination, to justify prejudice, to justify even genocide against certain people, not realizing that one of the reasons why Moses was writing Genesis or had compiled Genesis was to show the Israelites, why is everything the way it is? Why is Canaan singled out for destruction? And we finally get the answer that he was cursed through his father. Not that his father bore the curse to all of his offspring, but it was specifically stated, cursed be Canaan. And as it shows, the Canaanite nations were the ones that Israel defeated and destroyed in their conquest of the promised land. If you see the reason for the cursing, you can also then see what it resulted in. And he will dwell in the tents of his brethren, the Canaanites as slaves, as impoverished people, end up moving into the tents of the Israelites as servants. But had nothing to do with race. Had everything to do with the cursings being on the one that possibly Ham doted upon. So hopefully you learned something today. Maybe you already knew. But let's not tear up the Bible and not use good theological discernment, good hermeneutics. Don't suspend that for your own desires. But you follow hermeneutical principles exactly the way as intended by God to find out what God truly means out of these verses. I may next time do another verse that also shows that people twist it out of proportion to justify prejudice and racism and that thing. But remember, we're not supposed to do that. Because then also we have to tie in the fact that God saves all and considers all the same in his church. God bless you. God bless you. May he keep you. And I know it's getting late, but you take care of yourselves and may God bless you. Love you all.